Barbara woke to a heavy pounding on the motel door, the kind of hard, urgent knock that tears you out of sleep before your brain has time to catch up. The room was dim, lit only by a slice of parking lot light leaking through the curtains. Rain tapped against the window. Her head throbbed from the flu, and it took effort just to push herself up on one elbow and look toward the door. Her mother, Jane, was already out of bed, tying her robe as she crossed the thin strip of carpet. A man's voice came through the door, clipped and official, saying he was a police officer. He said there had been a serious accident nearby. He said Barbara's boyfriend was badly hurt, and they needed her to come right away. The story sounded urgent enough, and in that moment, it sounded real. Jane slid off the chain and cracked the door. In the yellow hallway light, she saw a man in a dark jacket, something like a badge glinting at his chest. Before she could ask anything, he drove his shoulder into the door, snapping the chain and forcing it wide. A woman followed him in, moving fast, a gun in her hand. The quiet room turned violent in seconds. The man, later identified as Gary Stephen Christ, grabbed Barbara by the arms and shoved her back toward the bed. Tape wrapped around her wrists in quick, practiced loops. Another strip was yanked across her mouth. Jane tried to fight back, but the second intruder pushed her down, gagged her, and tied her hands. The air filled with the sounds of scuffling, rushed breathing, and the gunwoman barking at them to stop moving. They dragged Barbara out into the hallway. Her bare feet scraped against the rough concrete walkway as they hauled her toward a waiting car. The December air outside was cold enough to bite straight through her thin pajamas. She twisted just enough to see her mother on the motel floor, helpless and bound, before she was shoved into the back seat. The door slammed. The car pulled away from the only person who knew where she was. Christ drove out of Decatur and away from the city lights, following dark two-lane roads lined with trees and scattered houses. The wipers squeaked in a steady rhythm. In the back seat, Barbara lay bound and sick, the flu pounding through her body, the tape tight over her mouth, every curve of the road a reminder that she was being taken farther from help. Eventually, the car turned off the pavement onto a rough track. Tires crunched over dirt and gravel. When it stopped, Christ yanked her out and marched her into a patch of woods. The air smelled like wet leaves and mud. A weak flashlight beam cut through the dark, guiding them to a shallow rectangular hole cut into the ground. Inside the hole sat a long fiberglass box. It was just big enough for a person to lie down in. Christ had built it ahead of time. He knelt beside it and, in a calm, matter-of-fact voice, explained what was inside. A small fan wired to a battery, a jug of water, food, blankets, a flashlight, an air pipe running up to the surface. He told her that if she stayed calm, there was enough air and supplies for her to survive until he got his ransom money. Barbara shook her head and tried to talk through the tape. Her words came out as broken sounds. She tried to tell him she was sick, that she could barely breathe already, that her parents would pay anything if he just did not bury her. He didn't respond. He cut the tape from her ankles and ordered her into the box. When she hesitated, he pushed her down into it. Her back hit the thin mattress. The fiberglass walls were inches from her shoulders. Christ checked the fan and the pipe one more time, then told her again she would be fine if she did what he said. Then he lowered the lid. She heard bolts scrape and lock into place. The outside world shrank to a ring of muffled sound. Then the dirt started to fall. Shovelfuls of earth hit the lid in heavy thumps. The darkness inside the capsule was total. The air felt warm and used almost immediately, with a faint taste of plastic and soil. The fan hummed. Her own breathing sounded too loud. She forced herself to take slow, even breaths, terrified that if she started to panic and gasp, she would use up the air faster. She switched on the flashlight for a few seconds, found the notepad he had left, and wrote a short message to her parents, telling them she loved them and that she was trying to be brave. Then she turned the light back off to save the battery and lay there, counting out seconds she could not see. Above ground, Christ began making his ransom demands. He contacted her father, a wealthy businessman, and demanded $500,000 in exchange for her life. He gave exact instructions on how and where to drop the money and warned him not to involve law enforcement. But the FBI was already at the motel, documenting the scene and interviewing witnesses. They knew they were dealing with a planned abduction, not a random crime. Agents quickly tied the car and descriptions back to Christ. They tracked his movements and fanned out across the region, knowing a hostage was somewhere out there and hidden. They didn't know yet that she was buried underground, but they knew every hour mattered. While they worked, Barbara lay in the dark, drifting in and out of sleep and panic. Her fever made time blur. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps above her. Sometimes she thought she heard nothing at all. Christ tried to carry out the ransom drop and then vanish. Instead, agents moved in on him near swampy ground after he fled on foot. He was arrested tired, dirty, and still trying to bargain. Even with handcuffs on, even knowing a young woman was buried alive, he refused at first to say where she was. He tried to negotiate, to trade information for promises he hadn't earned. Each hour he held back made the air inside that box thinner. Under relentless questioning and the clear threat of facing a murder charge if she died, Christ finally gave in. He agreed to lead agents to the burial site. They followed him into a wooded tract of land in DeKalb County. To anyone else, it looked like ordinary ground, leaves, mud, and scattered branches. Christ pointed to a specific patch of earth and told them she was there. That was all they needed. Agents dropped to their knees and started digging. At first they used their hands, then shovels that arrived seconds later. The dirt was wet and heavy, clinging to their clothes and packing under their nails. They dug fast, driven by the knowledge that if they were late by even a little, they would be opening a coffin instead of a hiding place. A shovel finally hit something solid with a hollow knock. They cleared the remaining dirt from the top of the fiberglass lid and yelled for silence, listening for any sound from inside. Then they went to work on the bolts, fingers slipping on mud-slick metal as they wrenched them loose. When they pried the lid open, a rush of hot, stale air escaped. Inside, curled on the mattress, was Barbara. She was pale, eyes swollen from crying, hair damp with sweat, but she was breathing. An agent reached down and lifted her out carefully, handing her up to others waiting at the edge of the hole. They wrapped her in blankets and steadied her. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke, asking first about her mother. She apologized for being sick. She apologized for causing trouble. She had been underground for 83 hours. The story of her kidnapping and rescue spread quickly across the country. A college student taken from a motel, buried alive in a homemade capsule, and pulled out just in time was something people struggled to process. Barbara later testified about what happened, answering questions in simple, direct language. She talked about the darkness, the heat, the sound of the fan, the way she rationed water and tried to keep herself calm by thinking about her family. Christ was sentenced to life in prison. For most people, that would have been the end of their freedom. Years later, he faced a parole board and claimed he was educated, stable, and remorseful. They believed him. He walked out and went into drug smuggling along remote waterways. Investigators quietly tied his name to other crimes and disappearances, but no charges ever stuck. Barbara built a different life. She married, had children, and did her best not to let what happened underground swallow everything that came afterward. She did not romanticize what she went through. When she spoke about it, she stayed close to the details that mattered most. The stale air, the cramped space, the way fear kept trying to climb up her throat, and how she pushed it back down because she wanted to see her parents again. The kidnapping of Barbara Mackle is remembered as a rare kind of survival. She was buried alive and lived long enough to be pulled out. But her case also shows how someone capable of that level of planning and cruelty was allowed to walk free again and disappear back into the shadows. Barbara survived the box. Others who crossed paths with the man who built it may not even have had that chance. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.